Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about specifically how to buy a used Accessport, and that is a used Cobb Accessport or Cobb AP or APA, depending on the platform you're in. This is my WRX. Obviously, Cobb and Subaru are hand in hand, but Cobb supports a ton of other platforms, and we're making just a generalized video that if you want to save some money buying a used Cobb Accessport for your car, regardless of what kind of car you drive, I'm going to go over everything you need to know in this video and give you some resources on how to check things, how to do certain specific things depending on the car that you drive, and absolutely everything you know so you don't get scammed. You don't buy a used Accessport that costs so much to figure out how to use on your car from Cobb that you may as well have bought it new, and basically protect you against a really costly mistake. If you guys aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, Cobb, there are two problems that can happen. Is you can have a Cobb Accessport that's licensed to the wrong type of vehicle, and you can have an unmarried and versus married Cobb Accessport. We'll talk about those specific things, but the short answer is if either of those things are wrong, let's say, and you've been basically like scammed or somebody didn't explain it or it didn't end up how you thought it was going to end up, Cobb will fix it for you, but for so much money that they're basically saying you need to buy it new. So I'm going to save you guys between $400 and $650 in this video if you watch it. So there's some incentive to watch the video. All right, so I've used Cobb Accessports for a long time, and basically I wanted to make a video that added some human context to some of the Cobb University videos. If you didn't know that they make a lot of videos for their own products, but not a lot of people know that they're out there. So I wanted to make kind of a recap and some personal experiences and some other things that you can do on top of it as just a retail buyer that's bought some used Accessports. I actually used to work with the owner of the AP guys who sell used Accessports, and I used to buy a lot of used Cobb Accessports for him to sell and resell to folks. So I've bought a lot of used Cobb Accessports. I've actually done it for a long time. I've probably bought maybe 300 or 400 used Cobb Accessports in the last 6 years. So I've done a lot of this, so I've had some experiences, and we're gonna talk about all that. So regardless of what you drive, there are two important things to understand about Cobb Accessports if you want to buy them used. If you want to buy them new, I think they're anywhere between $600 and $1,000 depending on what you drive. But if you want to buy them used, you can get a pretty good discount on them. And sometimes you can get add-ons that are well, it depends on the car. Sometimes specific tunes are carryoverable, and you can carry them over if you have the specific same car and you bought an off-the-shelf from somebody, and you can just relicense it to your car through the AP tuner. But let's say you're saving some money. So the first thing that you need to understand about searching for a Cobb Accessport is that you're buying the right license. Now, the right license is something that's specific to your year, model, and make of your vehicle, and also the transmission type of your vehicle if they make automatic versus manual transmissions for your specific model year. What you need to do is you need to go and look for a new Cobb Accessport, and it will give you a string of numbers. I will put it on the screen now for something that you can look for. Now, Cobb has a very extensive guide that I will link in the description for every car platform if you want to understand what you need to be looking for. But you need to understand that Cobb, if you mess this up, has a relicensing fee, which means you cannot use that Accessport unless you pay them a couple $100s. And again, it's different for every vehicle, but it's a pretty substantial amount of money. For the WRX, if you email them, it can be between $150 and $200 depending on the scenario. Usually they'll cut you a little bit of a break if you're kind to them because you're going to buy some more parts from them. They know that, but it's a substantial amount of money. For the first thing you need to understand is you need to understand what serial number Accessport you need to buy. Now, once you know that serial number, which you can just go onto their site and see what the serial number is for a brand new Accessport, you got to go buy that serial number. You cannot buy another serial number, or you need to basically relicense the Accessport. Now it gets more complicated, as in there are different versions. There's the V1, V2, V3. There are different versions of the Accessport. You can't relicense a version into a newer version, so you also have to be careful with that. So just understand at the get-go, when you go searching for an Accessport, that you know exactly what that license number needs to be. Now, a lot of people, let's say on Facebook Marketplace, might say, oh, it's from my 2015 WRX. But what might end up happening, and this happens all the time, is they bought it for their 2015 WRX and it didn't work. And it's because they got the licensing number wrong, but they don't want to pay Cobb a bunch of extra money. They just want to sell it for what they paid for it and retry and do it again. But they're not going to tell you anything else. So what you need to do, and you need to make sure that you get from them, is the licensing number which appears on the Cobb Accessport. That's number one. That's the less likely problem because it's easy to figure out the licensing number and get the right Accessport. The second one that's a lot harder, and this is where you can be scammed, and it happens all the time, it happens all the time, and sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's not, is you need to have either a married or unmarried Cobb Accessport. If a Cobb Accessport is unmarried, you can put it on your car and marry it to your car. And marrying just means you have a bond specifically to your vehicle, not to any vehicle, specifically to your vehicle. Now, if somebody takes off their Accessport from their car and they don't unmarry it from their car and then they sell it to you, that Cobb Accessport is still married to that person's car and will not work on your car. This is where it gets expensive. If you need to send that used Accessport into Cobb to unmarry it so you can use it on your car, they either charge you a percentage of the cost of a new Accessport, it's pretty darn expensive, or I think it's $475 is the minimum charge. It changes a little bit if you email them, sometimes they're nice, but you can expect to spend over $450 at the minimum to unmarry an Accessport. Now here's the tricky part. The only way to tell if a Cobb Accessport is married is to plug it into your car. Most of you guys will know when you're buying a used Accessport, you're buying it countrywide, you're trying to do it. And here's the thing, right? Somebody can show you a picture and say that it's unmarried because they have to plug it into their car and unmarry it, and then it shows the install screen, right? They could have that photo from somebody else, so you have to trust them. All of the times I've bought Cobb Accessports, I have somebody plug it into their car and show me the home install screen, which means they've unmarried it, right? I do it over FaceTime, and then I screen record it, honestly. Screen record it or do something like that. I make sure I have evidence of it. I get screenshots so that if I ever have to make a PayPal claim, I can go back. That being said, I'd say about 10% of the Cobb Accessports that I bought used out of that many hundreds were still married, and people were either unintentionally or intentionally trying to scam me, and I went through many PayPal battles. So the other thing is always use PayPal, but you need to understand that buying a used Cobb Accessport, it needs to be unmarried, right? And the only way to unmarry it is to unmarry it from the car that it's married to. Now what ends up happening is a lot of people wreck these cars, they trade them in. Somebody at the dealer, like they trade the car in and somebody at the dealer just yanks it out of there because they're just like, we don't need it anymore. They don't unmarry it, right? And a lot of these unmarried Accessports live on the market. You'll also see people trying to sell unmarried Accessports for like 250 bucks. It's not worth it because if you have to pay 500 bucks shipped round trip to get it, you might as well just pay $650 and save 100 bucks, 150 bucks on a new one, right? So that's how critical it is. And essentially with this whole marry, unmarry thing, all Cobb is trying to do is to get people to buy new Accessports, but not for the negative reasons, more so just to avoid this black market scamming issue that's been happening for many, many years. Back in the day, and we're talking like 8 or 10 years ago, they didn't have this massive charge, and it was easier as just a third party to unlicense these things and unmarry them. But the problem was there was just so much scamming that Cobb just wanted to step in and just say, yeah, it's gonna cost people a little bit more money, but we want to have the utmost esteem with our parts and everything. We're just gonna make it so expensive to deal with that you might as well just buy it new so people aren't just getting ruthlessly scammed on the market. So the short answer is it's easy to save a lot of money buying a used Cobb Accessport, but it's also easy to get screwed and have to spend a lot of money, and you might as well just buy one new. Now, again, I've never bought one new. I've always bought them used, and I also know that they're worth a ton of money if you can get a good deal. So if you want to be super entrepreneurial, which I don't encourage because it's going to inflate the market, but you could do what I used to do and basically be in the game of just buying them at good deals and buying every one that was a good deal because you know that you can resell it in the long run. It's part of the game, but you can also, if you do that, you can guarantee you're selling people married Cobb Accessports. So that being said, guys, that's the basic rundown of just that you can't know unless you see. And unless you're in person, you can't know specifically, right? And if you buy the wrong license, it's gonna cost you money. And that's basically everything you need to know. Now, I'm gonna link a very, very specific guide from Cobb in the description of this video. Now, when you're at the point of doing this, I would read the guide because it'll help you understand specific costs based on your car so you can make an informed decision. I'm just speaking mainly around costs about the WRX because that's what I know the best. It gets real interesting when you get into expensive cars like the GTR. It gets really expensive very quickly if you mess up. But with that said, use the guide when you're ready to do it if you're gonna save the money. And if you're not willing to take the risk and you don't wanna go through it, just buy it new. I know that's a hard pill to swallow when they're like 650 plus, but sometimes you just gotta buy a new one because you don't wanna avoid the risk and hassle of going through a claim or anything like that if somebody tries to scam you. But it also, I'm not trying to discourage you from buying them used. You're listening to somebody that's bought more used than any of you guys will buy in your lifetime, right? Just like without a doubt, right? So that's the information that I wanted to give you in this video. I think it's super important. I've seen more and more of these scams come up recently, especially as people get in and get out of these cars more frequently than they used to. I think like specifically with the WRXs and just generally tuned cars, people seem to be flipping between cars more and faster than they used to. So we're seeing more access ports on the market in general. And also, just for you guys that are buying a used access port, a $50 deal is not a good deal because of the risk that you're taking. So when you're going to buy one, I would just recommend this, and you're selling them too, just understand most people aren't paying more than $400 to $450 for a used Cobb Accessport. If you really would need one right away, maybe $500, but over that amount of money, it's not worth it. So don't buy it and wait for the person to flex to that, because that's actually the price that they're selling. So buying a used Accessport, you can usually save about $150 in free shipping. Sometimes you can save a little bit more. Cobb very rarely has sales. They have them once a year, and their access ports are usually about 25 bucks off. So it's still a substantial savings if you can get them used. The rule of thumb used to be, if you drive a WRX or most other cars, the savings is the equivalent of also buying a used intake. So stage 1 tunes on most cars include an intake, regardless of what you drive, for most cars. So a good example with the WRX is, I remember when I bought my Cobb intake and my used access port for my 2016 WRX, I bought the intake and the access port for the same amount that it would have just cost me for a new access port, which means I saved about $400 on the intake. That's generally how to metric your own good deal. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully you protect yourself from a scam, and hopefully you learned something. I'll see you guys in the next video.